theyeshiva.net.
Before I begin, and it's going to be relatable also to the Maimer, I just want to share an interesting insight, a moving insight, and that is that the Rebbe Rayatz was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who passed away in 1950 in New York. He was a son of the Rashab, who was a grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was a grandson of the Balatanya. So before Shavuos, he had a custom. He would bless everybody with the following blessing: Kabbalas HaTorah, B'simcha u'b'pnimiyus, which means he blessed them to accept the Torah, to receive the Torah with joy and with pnimiyus, with inner sincerity. And this thus was also the custom of the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, his son-in-law, the most recent Lubavitcher Rebbe, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, who would always, before Shavuos, both publicly and privately, and especially in his correspondence in writing, I think almost to anybody that he wrote a letter before Shavuos, he would always say that he wants to conclude with the blessings that his father-in-law, the Rebbe, used to give before Shavuos: Kabbalas HaTorah b'simcha v'pnimiyus, to accept the Torah with joy and with inner sincerity. Once at a Shavuos Farbrengen, it was in 1965, Tavshin Chaf Hei, the Rebbe asked why his father-in-law would particularly offer this blessing before Shavuos. I mean, it's a beautiful blessing, but it's a blessing that should apply to every holiday. And it's really a blessing that should apply to every single mitzvah. Every single holiday and every single mitzvah and every single part of Yiddishkeit, we should perform with joy and with sincerity. With joy, with happiness, and with earnestness. Every mitzvah should be performed with a sense of simcha. As the Rambam famously explains at the end of Hilchos Lulav, how powerful the avodah of simcha is in mitzvahs and in Torah. And nonetheless, it was before Shavuos that he offered this blessing. Why? And the Rebbe then suggested very beautiful insight, and he said that every mitzvah that a person does, or every holiday that we celebrate, or any other part of Yiddishkeit, even though it's always best when it's performed with joy and with earnestness and with inner sincerity, but the fact is that people go through changes. Life is a roller coaster. Sometimes I'm inspired, and sometimes I'm uninspired. Sometimes I'm in a good mood, and sometimes I'm in a challenging mood. Sometimes I'm feeling happy and enthusiastic and enthralled, and sometimes the opposite. Sometimes I feel earnest and sincere and authentic, and sometimes I feel more robotic and superficial. And you know what? That's the story of life. The story of life is that we go through fluctuations, we go through changes, and we have to weather the storm and endure through all of the psychological climates of the soul and grow from them like the esrog. So if a Jew comes to you and says, today I'm not in the mood of putting on tefillin. Today I'm not in the mood of davening. Okay. And what happens if you're not in the mood of feeding your children, or you're not in the mood of being a father or being a mother? So what, you're going to quit? You're going to quit? You have to have values. You have to have a compass. What's right? What's wrong? What are your convictions? Sometimes I feel it. My sister's making a wedding, and I'm not in the mood of going to the wedding. So I'm not going to go to the wedding because I'm not in the mood, because I'm tired. Okay. A person has a value that transcends our moods. We all understand that. But there's one exception. And that is if I want to become a Jew. If somebody wants to become a ger, a convert, and they say, I don't really want to convert. I'm not really. I'm doing it because of pressure, because of social conformity, because I like my boyfriend, because I like my girlfriend, because I want to fit in here, because I want this job, then we can't accept them. Why? Once you're a Jew, whether you're in the mood or you're not in the mood, a Jew is a Jew, afal pi shechati Yisrael, you're internally connected. Now you're in the mood, great. You're happy about it, great. You're not, okay. So you'll do it without simcha. But to become a Jew, you're going through an essential transformation. To be able to get a Jewish soul, for this, I have to be there with all my heart and with all my soul. If a convert says, I'm doing it superficially, I'm not really interested, then I can't become a Jew. To give a practical example for this is in marriage. Anybody who will tell you that a marriage is consistently blissful, so maybe besides a few exceptions, that's not realistic. Couples have arguments, couples have ups and downs, couples have disputations, couples get into disagreements. That's just the nature of humanity, and it's not a bad thing. People are different, people go through different experiences, and that's normal. What you expect is not that they should always be excited about each other, but that they should always be accountable to each other, and they should be guided by a value of not running away and being honest and being vulnerable and being present. The fact that the expectation that should always be on top of the world and feeling the deepest joy and bliss in my marriage, if you can, that's wonderful, awesome. But we all appreciate the fact that people may go through different things, especially people who are dealing with trauma and dealing with various issues. They have to be able to respect and have compassion about the fact that their brain comes up with all types of thoughts, but it doesn't have to dictate my values, it doesn't have to dictate the truth of the relationship. That's all once you're married. But if somebody says, I'm getting married to this person, but I'm not really in the mood, I'm not really interested, I'm just doing it because I've been pressured, because other people want me to do it, because they say it's good for the family, they say that it's good for this and for that. That's not good. Halachically, marriage has to be with the full consent of both the husband and the wife. Once you're married, marriage goes through different stages. Sometimes it's very inspiring. Sometimes you have to work through some issues. But to get married, you have to be fully there. From all the holidays in Judaism, Shavuos is the time that the Jewish people went through a conversion. The Gemara says in Yevamos that Matan Torah was the time of Geirus. That's when the Jews became a people. And every year on Shavuos, we re-experience and reenact the experience of the first Shavuos. So that's why when it came to Shavuos, the Rebbes would wish, Kabbalas HaTorah b'simcha or b'pnimiyas. Once you're a Jew, now you go, you move. It should always be with simcha and with pnimiyas. But we can appreciate the fact that a person goes through different stages. When it comes to Shavuos, Shavuos is the holiday of identity. Shavuos is the Yom Tov that defines who you are, not just what you do. Defining who you are, this has to be with full consciousness. This has to be with full presence of mind and heart. That's why he would say, you should accept the Torah, you should have the privilege of receiving the Torah b'simcha, with joy, with enthusiasm, or b'pnimiyus, and with sincerity. We are up to Seif Dalet in the Maimer. If you open your source sheets already, it's page 80, column 2. This is the last chapter of the Maimer. Seif Dalet, this is the Maimer from the Balatanya Lekut Torah Bahar, Ki Savoyu El Haaretz V'Shavsa Haaretz Shabbos Lashem, Dalet. Second column, page 80. If you like the Hebrew numbers, it's page Mem, column 4, in the middle of the page. After, I'm not going to give a summary of the whole Maimer, because you know what happens when I give a summary of the whole Maimer, we won't finish the Maimer. We'll get stuck in the summary for good reason. Because when you give a summary, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's very hard to move on. So therefore, I'm going to ask everybody to chazer the Maimer on their own. This is a Maimer that you should know well, to review it. And if you haven't heard it yet, if this is your first time here, welcome. And you'll have a chance. You could replay it either on double speed, as some people say, or as the others say, that music you don't listen to in double speed, but I don't get involved in that question. That depends on how your brain works. But the bottom line is, try to learn it so you'll understand everything till Seif Dalet, and then you'll appreciate more what we're learning. But the bottom line is, if we're going to summarize it literally in a few sentences, the Alter Rebbe spoke about Pischili Achoisi, that was chapter 1. Open up the door for me so that you can experience me as your sister. Chapter 2, he went to Rayasi, from Achaisi to Rayasi, my sister, my shepherd, where we're not only connected, but where you feed me, or in other words, you become one with me, because what we eat becomes literally part of us. And that happens through Torah. And the way that the Torah does it, that was the whole long explanation in chapter 2, that even the Torah came down into the physical reality. But nonetheless, the Torah is called bread. And the process of bread is that you can't just eat it straight from the ground. There's planting, and then there's grinding, and then there's kneading, and then there's baking, as he explained at length. And he explained at length how the first thing you do with the bread, the first thing you have to do with the seed is plant it. The whole explanation about Torah. There's the source of Torah, which is infinite. There's the way the Torah comes down here, which is the seed. And when the seed is planted in the earth, it produces the tree with all of the delicious fruits, which represents these three dimensions of Torah, the Torah in the source, and the Torah in Gan Eden, and the Torah the way it is down here, which is why the Alter Rebbe says, that when a person understands the Pnimiyus HaTorah, so then the seed becomes aligned with the earth, and then one can appreciate schar mitzvah, the actual fruit. And essentially this is one of the major functions of Torah Chassidus, of Pnimiyus HaTorah, generally Pnimiyus HaTorah, especially the way it was revealed and articulated in the teachings of Chassidus, which really takes every single theme in Torah and sees it the way it is in Gan Eden, meaning its spiritual essence, its psychological and emotional core, where the technical and intricate intellectual nuances and details and themes are very powerful, but they're also reflections of the infinite divine wisdom that is flowing through these ideas. And in order for the person to be able to become one with this Torah which is planted, he went through the whole idea of davening, what davening is. But planting is not enough. The seed also has to be grinded. He explained what is grinding. Grinding is the humility and the ability to dissect yourself and take yourself apart. He spoke about the idea of kneading, which is bringing in the water, the love, which makes all the particles one. And then finally the baking, which is the fire, not the water, the fire, because the fire is even a deeper love where I don't want to find myself, I want to lose myself. The fire completely takes you apart and consumes you. You become subsumed in the flame. And the second idea of the baking was the powerful compassion represented by Yosef's tears for his brother, for Binyamin, but that's done in the privacy of his room. And then he comes out and he says, Chevra, let's eat bread. Those are the 4 stages that Limud HaTorah require. You got to plant the seed, align the Torah down here with the Torah up there, be able to see in every piece of Torah that it's divine energy, it's divine truth, it's a divine flow of infinity. Number 2, be able to grind it, be able to knead it, and be able to bake it. Dalet. You know what? I see that a few lines from Gimel we didn't finish, so let me just finish a few lines from Gimel right before Dalet. Okay. Vayideza, a few lines before Dalet, the line starts Vayideza. Vayideza, through all this, what's all this? Through the planting and the grinding and the kneading and the baking. Nasa, what happens? Through all this, Nasa satayra b'chidas lechem afoy mamish, the Torah becomes baked bread. It becomes edible. Shenivla be'evarin the malka, b'chinas bittel ba'erin seif baruch hu mamish, aydei shenivla be'evarin afshei halikas. It becomes bread that is absorbed by the king, by the limbs of the king. If something is not edible, you can't eat it. If you can't eat it, you can't digest it, it doesn't become part of you. As long as the Torah is not baked bread, it never becomes absorbed in the limbs of the king where it's one mamish with the Ein Sof. But when the Torah goes through this process, so now every shtickle Gemara that I learn, every Mishnah that I learn, every Pasuk Chumash that I learn, anything that I learn in Torah, could be a Sif in Shulchan Aruch, it could be a Vart in Musar, in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, in Medrash, Torah Shebeksav, Torah Shebal Peh, Mishnah, Gemara, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Medrashim, Rishonim, Achronim, Poskim, whatever it is. A pasuk chumash. A Mishnah. There's bread that's baked, and there's bread that's not baked yet. You have a seed. A seed is wonderful. A seed has the whole DNA inside of it. A seed has everything inside of it. But at the surface, from a conspicuous experiential point of view, it's only a seed. But when I plant the seed, I align it with the Ein Sof. I have to put it in the earth, cover it with the earth. It needs to decompose in the earth, which is really what Chassidus does to Nigla, what Pnimius does to Nigla. The Nister is like the earth, it's the Ein Sof. The Nigla is the seed, which has in it everything. You align it with the earth. Then there's the grinding. The grinding is the humility, the vulnerability, the bittul. The grinding is also taking it apart. As he said, what girsa is, garsina. There is the kneading, the ava kamayim. There is the baking, the ava ka'esh. And there's the baking, the compassion that I have on my soul and the divine spark that descended sometimes into a very low space, and I can make space for that, and yet not get engulfed only in tears, but like Yosef, I could say, let's eat bread together with the tears. Now it's baked. If it's baked, who eats it? So this is now Hashem's bread that becomes completely one with him. This is a Torah that's mamash ein sof. Now when a person eats this Torah as well, in other words, it becomes absorbed in him. So now the person himself or herself becomes Rayasi. You become God's shepherd. In other words, like his food, completely indivisible, ishtav begufa de malka, as he said in the beginning of Siv Beis. This is then the deeper interpretation of the Gemara in Psachim Nun. Fortunate is somebody who comes here, literally to Gan Eden, and his learning is in his hand. What's pshat? Pirush shetalmudoi nisyachid benafshay v'lo hayu la'achadam. Talmudei biyadei means not just he's holding a sefer in his hand. It means that the Talmudei, the learning, became completely one with him. It's like food. L'chu lachmu belachmi, as he explained earlier. It's the bread that I absorb, it's me, and they become completely one. If the bread is never baked, even if it was planted and kneaded and grinded and kneaded, but it was never baked, it could never become absorbed in the limbs of your soul. And therefore it could never become life and sustenance for the soul. It's baked bread through which a person lives. In other words, the edible bread. A person can eat dough. I guess if there's a crisis, you eat dough. But it's not something that's going to sit well in the body. I guess if there's a crisis, Chasham, you'll eat flour, but it's not something that the body retains. It's not. You have the flour, and you have the kneading, and you have the baking. Now you have a shtickle bread. It's a whole different story. If it's not baked, the keva is the abdomen, the stomach, can't cook it, can't digest it, can't turn it into cooking is taking something raw and turning it into something edible. But your intestines also have to cook. Every food that comes into our digestive system has to go through a process of transformation until it could be transmitted to the right part of the body that can use this food in the most useful way. This is the miracle of digestion. One of the greatest miracles of biology is the system of digestion. How your body knows to take a piece, all the foods of the world, whatever comes in. It could be an apple, it could be a peach, it could be an omelet, it could be goat cheese, it could be a watermelon, it could be a piece of chicken, it could be sprouts, or the covered shmuas. It could be healthy cheesecake, which means without sugar. Or maybe without carbs, if you could do that. Whatever it is, goes into the body, goes into your mouth, the body says, okay, chick-chack, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, before you know it, we do it unconsciously, we don't even know how it works. Children, infants do this, toddlers do it. How does the body know how to do this? What you have to learn in university, you have to learn in books or videos for years and years. The digestive system, somehow, the baby's body knows it. Azoi, azoi, azoi. How do you explain that? How do they know this? No, I don't know it. You don't know it. We've been doing it. You say you're doing it for 42 years and you still don't know how you do it. This is incredible. But the keva somehow cooks it all and makes it happen. If it's not baked, if it's not edible, you start eating raw potatoes. You start eating raw flour. You can eat it. And the chas v'shalom in a time of crisis, people will eat anything. But that's not the way to eat. It can become part of you. You're going to get nauseous. You're going to get sick. You're not going to feel sustained. You're not going to feel alive. You eat the food that's raw, it's going to remain separate in your intestines, in your stomach. It's not going to become absorbed in the limbs. This is a metaphor. If you don't bake the Torah, if there's no fire, a person learns and learns and learns. But felt the fire, there's no oven. You need the oven that comes from the echad. The echad. The echad creates a fire. You remember Zachar v'Shamar b'Dibur? Echad. The Alter Rebbe said you have to remember and protect in every single thing in the world and in every word, the echad of it. If there's lacking a fire and there's lacking the compassion, the fire, the warmth, the compassion of Yosef for Binyamin ben Oini, what happens? The words he describes it. The Torah is one thing and his soul is something else. Talmud is not in his hand. Talmud in his hand means it's inside of me. It's in not just in my hand, in my physical hand. Talmud biyadai, you say, ahatas in hand. It's inside of me. It's part of me. The great challenge of Yiddishkeit is you have a person, some of you know this very well, he knows all the information. He may even like the information, but it's not part of me. It never becomes part of me. It never became baked bread. It never reached that point. Sometimes it's not even planted. Sometimes it's not grinded. Sometimes it's not needed. But sometimes, even if that happened, what's missing is the fire of the baking that allows the lechem to become completely edible, v'talmudai biyadai, so that it's completely one with me. Dalet. But before a person learns, the Gemara says, Ashrei mi shebalekan v'talmudai biyadai. He has to show up here. What does it mean he has to show up here? Showing up here, as he said earlier, what's Ashrei Misha Balakan? It's talking about Misha Balakan, somebody who comes to the higher world, somebody who comes to Gan Eden with Talmud Biyadai. So the Alter Rebbe explained earlier in chapter 3, what's the idea of Balakan? Balakan means that he shows up into the relationship. He's present into the relationship with Hashem, as he said before, that a person learns after davening. The Shulchan Aruch says, based on Masechta Brachas, that we go beis haknesses, lebeis hamedrash. The time of learning is after davening, because during davening, the person arouses the love and arouses the alignment, the Mesiras Nefesh, the bittul, that the Nefesh Elikis unites with its source, as we explained in earlier shiurim what tefillah is. So the person shows up through bittul. The person shows up in the world of Elikus. And then the Talmud is together with him. So he says, before you learn Tzarech Gamkin B'chinas Balakan, Dainu La'oid, Resa'ava B'tfila B'mesiras Nefesh, B'tl Metzias Elav Yizbarach, Kadei Sheyuchal Lilmad Achekach Al Derech Hanam. In order for a person to be able to learn this way, first I have to daven. And davening is the time when I arouse the love. But Mesiras Nefesh means I dedicate my soul. Ubittel b'mitzias, I align my entire mitzias with Hashem, so that afterwards, when a person is balakan, when a person shows up here, v'talmud biyadei, then he could learn in the same way. And therefore, the real time for learning, the Shulchan Aruch says, is right after davening. Because after davening, the learning has that focus, has that depth, has that intensity. When somebody comes here, he shows up here, and he shows up with the Talmud as part of him. This is the person about Chazal say, Ashrei Misha Balakan v'Talmud b'yadeh. Because what is davening? Davening is when the person arouses within himself or herself the state of achoisi. In other words, davening is the time that I align my vision of myself with God's vision for me. Remember, we spoke about what a chazan is. A chazan is chazayin, vision. We spoke about tefillah, lehispalel, to imagine yourself from the divine perspective. In other words, tefillah is the time when a person lets go of all of his or her shells and husks and fears and insecurities. It's the time of deep spiritual therapy and alignment where the person could become completely one with the source of infinity called Chachma Elah, with God's wisdom of the world. In other words, I align my vision of life with God's vision for me. Now afterwards, when I learn, the learning has the same quality, that the Torah is completely aligned with the Chachma Elah, with the infinite divine wisdom, which is manifested in the Torah. And then there is a complete unity, that the light of the Torah is completely united with the light of the Nefesh HaLekis, and the Torah itself is united with its source. V'zehu, and that's why, after the parentheses, we go back to the beginning of the Maimer. Do you remember the Alter Rebbe's question at the beginning of the Maimer? His question was, right in the beginning, it says in the opening of Bahar, Ki savoyu el haaretz hashani noisen lachem, v'shavsa haaretz Shabbos l'Hashem, Shei shanim tizra sadecha, Shei shanim tizmer karmecha v'asafta es tfuasa, Shana hashviyis is Shabbos l'Hashem. When you come to the land that I give you, the earth should rest for a Shabbos, a whole year of rest. 6 years you plant, 6 years you prune, and the 7th year is Shemitah, the sabbatical year of serenity and rest. And Alter Rebbe asked, it sounds like right when you come to the land, you should celebrate Shemitah, but that's not the case. First, you had to work the land for 6 years, and then was Shemitah. But the Torah in Bahar makes it sound, when you come to the land, V'shav Sa'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem, right away Shemitah. And then he says 6 years you should work, and the 7th year should be Shabbos. It's extremely strangely phrased. Say, when you come to the land that I give you, you should work the earth for 6 years, and on the 7th year, V'shav Sa'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem. That's not what the pasuk says. Even though halachically, in reality, that's not the case. As the pasuk explains itself later on. First you have 6 years, and then you have Shabbos. In order to understand this, the Alter Rebbe said, let's explain the whole pasuk in Shir Hashirim. That's how we got into the whole discussion. And he started to explain that there's a constant relationship because we are chelik elakami mal mamish, but the relationship could be concealed. And he spoke about emes lamitoy and emes and what blocks the relationship. And you have to open up a door, pischili, you have to break through the blockages and the cover-ups, and the love could sometimes be concealed by all of the addictions of the person, which are really an outlet of that love, but they don't realize it. We explained this all at length in the previous classes. So the Alter Rebbe comes back now when he says, V'zeu ki savoyu ala aretz pirush. Miyad kisavayu. Right when you come. What's kisavayu? Shubchinas balakan. We spoke about the Gemara, Ashrei Misha balakan. Fortunate is the person who comes here to the higher world, to Olam Haba. V'talmud biyadeh. So Alter Rebbe says, right when you show up, right when you come to the land. Miyad kisavayu v'ya'oidu es ha'ava. B'bchinas tefillah, b'chinas nefesh. K'moshe kasov. Right when you come, when you come, and you arouse your love to Hashem, which is what real tefillah is. As we said, tefillah is called nefesh. Tefillah is the time. Chana said, I pour out my soul to Hashem. And what does it mean you pour a soul? How do you pour a soul? You pour water. You pour wine, you pour apple juice or orange juice or mango juice. How do you pour a soul? The idea is, as he said, pouring the soul is that I allow my soul to go out of all of the traps, to go out of all of the confinements, I pour it out. If something is contained in a bottle or in a can, right? I open it up, I open the lid, and I pour it out. So I pour my soul. I allow my soul to go free. I allow my soul to soar. That's why it's called ve'eshpeches nafsh. So he says, Hu b'chinas eretz elyoina. This is kisavoyu el ha'aretz. You come to the land. The land is also the spiritual earth, the divine earth, which he explained earlier was Malchus. It was Dvar Hashem Zu Halacha. It's the mother earth, feminine earth, Hakal Hayim and Ava, which is the source of all vegetation. As he said before in Seif Beis, that this is the Dvar Hashem, the source of Koyach HaTzameach in the Eretz. I align myself in davening with the Eretz Elyoina, with the divine source of everything, which is called Mother Earth. Ashani noisim lechem. It's the land that I give you. The pasuk says, Ki ha'ava ha'mitisi abba milmaila, because true love is the love that comes from above. But the person has to be open to it. I have to inspire myself. And then whenever there's an arousal from below, there's an arousal from above. The real love is always a gift. Real love is not something that I create on my own. I can open myself up to it. Isarusa de lasata creates isarusa de laela. Meaning, when I open myself up to it, then I'm a keli, I'm a vessel to receive the gift. But the ava hamitis yabam almaila. The real love is something, a gift that Hashem gives you. Va'az v'shav saharitz. So when you show up, kisavayu alaretz, when you show up to this relationship in davening, God is waiting. But show up, kisavayu alaretz. Ba lekan, come here, kisavayu, ba. Be a ba, show up. Show up with this relationship. And I'm going to give it to you. Your taka showing up, but the love is coming from me. So the first thing is, V'shavsa aretz Shabbos Lashem, the Hainu, K'mashakasu b'Sifra d'Tznius. Sifra d'Tznius is one of the sections of Zohar. It's called Sifra d'Tznius. It's one of the very complicated sections in the teachings of Kabbalah and Zohar. So he says over there in Sifra d'Tznius, V'shavsa aretz means V'ara is batalas. V'shavsa literally means the earth should rest. The Sifra d'Tznius says, Va'ara is batalas. The earth is bottle. The Hainu she'yeh b'chin is bittel. V'shavsa aretz means that the earth becomes is batalas. Literally, is batalas means, in Yiddish there's an expression, a battled, right? A heilig bottle, negate bottle. Meaning the earth doesn't do anything. When you don't do anything, you say it's a battlin, a battled. Yeah? Va'ara is batalas. You don't plow the earth. You don't plant. You don't work the earth. The earth doesn't have to work. The earth is on vacation for a year. The earth rests. That's called Shabbos. The earth doesn't do anything. The earth relaxes. It gets to breathe. It gets to enjoy the views. It gets to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. That's what happens. Va'ara is batalas. What's the deeper idea here? The idea is that all the faculties of my soul experience a state of va'ara is batalas bittul, which means complete alignment in the connection with the source, with oneness. Shabbos Lashem, and then he adds v'shavsa haaretz Shabbos, bittul acha bittul. V'shavsa haaretz Shabbos. In other words, there's a Shabbos after a Shabbos. Va'ara is batalas bittul acha bittul. Dahainu betchilu v'shavsa is b'chinas sur meira. The first state of v'shavsa of bittul is going away from toxicity. V'acha kach Shabbos Lashem b'chinas v'asei toiv tzarich sheyeh gam kem b'chinas bittul ana. And then there is asei toiv, doing the positive, also needs to be in a state of bittul. So you have a shavsa and you have Shabbos. Generally, life is divided into two categories. Sur meira, vasei toiv. Sur meira means going away from that which is toxic, that which is destructive, that which is immoral, that which is promiscuous, and that's a major part of life. The ability to set boundaries and to say, this is not for me, I'm not going to go there. And this is very deep avoid in my own mind. Will you allow your mind to go? Will you allow your heart to go to sur meira? That's the first state. Then there is asei toiv. Then there is the positive that I engage in. The bittul of a shav says both. V'shav sa'aretz Shabbos Lashem, he says, bittul achar bittul. In order to be able to align all of the faculties of your soul with Hashem, achoisi, my sister, Let's remember, Achaisi is that Ichi Alexandra is the Alexandrian knot in Moed Katan Daf Chavav, as the Gemara describes it, which is basically that inner connection. I want to align the faculties of my soul with the source. This has two states, Sur Meira and Asay Tov. You can't have one without the other. I can engage in positive things, but if I'm still stuck in my addictions or my narishkeit, then it's not going to work. I have to be able to detach from things that are holding me hostage. And then I have to engage in positivity. So that's the two Shabbases. Comes the Pasuk and says, now, after a guten davenen, now you could plant your field for 6 years. Elu shisa sidre Mishnah. The Pasuk is homiletically intimating to the 6 sections of the Mishnah. That's 6 years. Tizra sadecha. You have to take shisha sidre Mishnah. 6 years. Zroyim, Moyed, Noshim, Nizik, Kachim, Taris, which is basically the body of Torah Shabbal Peh. All Torah Shabbal Peh ultimately is encapsulated in those 6 years, those Darim, because Zroyim deals with all the halachas connected to agriculture and blessings. Moyed, everything connected to time. Noshim, anything connected to relationships. Nizikin, anything connected to civil law. Kachim, anything connected to the Beis HaMikdash and Karbanis and Avodah. And Taris, anything connected to purity and impurity. Here you have the whole body of Yiddishkeit. Torah Shabbal Peh Halacha. Tizra be'eretz al yoyin shenikra sada. Remember, it's all seeds. It has the DNA, but it's a seed. You don't leave a seed on the windowsill. Don't only relate to the Torah's external dimension. Tizra, take the 6 years, and Tizra sadecha. Plant the Shisha Sidre Mishnah. Where should you plant it? Be'eretz el yoina, in the divine earth, in the divine koyach hatzemeach, in the divine infinity. Shenikra sada chakal tapuchin kadish. In Kabbalah, it's called chakal tapuchin kadish. Chakal is a field. Tapuchin kadish is holy apples. Friday night, those who say before Kiddush, the liturgy of the Arizal, Askinu Sudasa, the Meimnusa, Shleimasa, Chadvasa, the Malka Kaddish, Askinu Sudasa, Doi Sudasa, the Chakal, Tapuchin Kaddishin. This is the meal of the field of holy apples. Pchin is Devar Hashem. Eretz Al Yoina, the Eretz, that's called the divine energy. You remember we learned Tache is Eish Das. That the power of vegetation in the earth is the divine energy. God said Tache, and the Shach writes from Reb Shimshon, he brought earlier in chapter 2, it's Eish Das, the fire of Torah. That's the Dvar Hashem, which is the Eretz, it's the mother, it's the Shechina that invigorates and makes everything grow. Liyah is Kamashal Hazriya Hana. So that the Torah should be planted, as we explained at length, the metaphor of planting. V'sheishanim tizmar, and then there's 6 years of pruning the vine. Hupchinas Talmud. This is the Gemara. Shehu taimei ha-mishnah svareseha, which is the reasons for every Mishnah and the logic behind every Mishnah. In other words, v'hash ta'asi shabbat mashakasa v'shavsa kaidem sheishanim tizra. Now it's gishmak. Al pi chsidis. This is obviously an explanation, not in the literal words, not in the literal meaning of the words, but in the spiritual meaning of the words. Now we understand why he says the earth should rest before he speaks about the 6 years, even though Shabbos Shemitah comes after the 6 years. V'hainu ki mikoydem b'chinas shei shanim tizra v'tismer shoesek ha'torah tzarich liyas b'chinas ha'mesilas nefesh b'tfila shob'chinas v'shavsa ha'aretz ara is batalas kedei liyas b'chinas balakan v'talmuda biyadai. There's no real learning without a real davening. The halacha does reflect it. The halacha says that every day in the morning, the first thing is tefillah, then there's Torah, and then there's going out to the world.
I understand, but in Shemitah, it's 6 years first.
No. Yeah, so see, the way this pasuk is interpreted in Avodas Hashem, where it's not only talking about a 7th year, it's talking about every day of a person's life. You understand? The way these psukim are represented in every day of a person's life. So the first thing is, you have to show up ala aretz. V'shav sa'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem. That's ara is batalas. That's the mesiras nefesh of tefillah, of alignment, of bittul. That's the first thing. And then Shei Shanim Tizra Sadecha, V'Shei Shanim Tizma Karmecha. Shei Shanim Tizra Sadecha is Mishnah, which is the halacha itself. You plant your field. And Tizmar Karmecha, what does Tizmar mean? Tizmar means you prune. When you prune, you remove the weeds, you perfect it, right? You make sure it's beautiful. So he says that's like the Gemara. What the Gemara does is, the Gemara takes the Mishnah, and the Gemara beautifies the Mishnah, explains it and develops it and dissects it, right? It perfects the field. Tizmar Karmech. Both are 6, because the Gemara is on the Mishnah. You have 60 Mesechtes. You have 6 Darim. Shisha Mesechtes. 6 Darim. It's also the number 6. So therefore, this is all after the Veshavsa Aretz Shabbos Lashem, in order to be the Talmud biyadai. Ashrei Misha Balakan Talmud biyadai. You need first the Balakan before Talmud biyadai. Yeah. Ask us.
What time? Shavsa or Shabbos? Hashem.
No, here it's the same thing. We're talking about Shemitah. Shavsa Shabbos Hashem is the same thing. He's just saying the reason it says the word Shabbos twice is because there's the bittul of Sur Meirah and there's the bittul of Asay Tov. V'shavsa Aretz Shabbos Hashem is bittul achabit. V'hinei ba'avodah sa'ad hakerem tzarech u'lezamer. When you work a vineyard, you have to prune, you have to weed out. Lezamer is weeding out, removing, uprooting. Dahainu liktzoit hakoitzim hamachalim esakerem. In a vineyard, there are going to be thorns that threaten to undermine and destroy a vineyard. You have weeds, you have thorns, you have wild growths and plants that will disturb the successful blossoming of the vine. Of course, you have animals that could come and eat it up. Those of you who live in our neck of the woods, you know that people who have gardens, the deer come and eat, so you have to have your fences, you have to have your protection. Of course, there's viruses, there's bacteria. There are the elements that will attack the life, the organic life of your field or of your vine. This is part of planting. Vanetiyah. It's part of zriyah, of sowing and planting. Ki hazoymer chayev mishum noiteya. We learned in Masechta Shabbos that somebody who prunes on Shabbos is liable because of the malacha of planting. Why? I'm not planting. Mishum delitzmuchi pairi avid. This is what the Gemara says in Shabbos. Because when you're pruning, what are you trying to do? You're promoting the growth. You're trying to remove, just like when you plant a seed. You're allowing growth. So the Gemara says, "Hazoymer chayev mishum neiteya." Somebody who goes out Shabbos to the field, to the orchard and prunes, you're liable because of neiteya, because that's what zoymer does. Litzmuche peri of it. It's all part of allowing growth. You have to remove it. Yeah, you're not planting, but by removing the weeds or removing the thorns, pruning your vine, you're allowing the peris to grow. Kachu al derech mashal limud haTalmud. Now we'll understand why. Shei Shanim Tizra Sadecha is Mishnah, and Shei Shanim Tizma Karmecha is Gemara. Shehu Birur HaHalacha. What does Gemara do? A beautiful explanation. Gemara is basically pruning the plant. It's clarifying the halacha. Shemavada, what the Gemara usually does is Eichaya Asal Kadaitach BeGemara. V'chala Kushis HaNoiflim Lafi Asal Kadaitach SheBeGemara. Oyafilu Asal Kadaitach the Makshan. V'kushiyasei b'chdei levarer halacha brura l'chei nimshelu divrei Talmud l'yayin ha'mesameach machmas birur halacha. So Alter Rebbe says here, the pasuk says 6 years you should plant your field, 6 years you should prune your vineyard. First he speaks about a field, then he speaks about a vine, a vineyard. In the first case he speaks about planting, in the second case he speaks about pruning. So he says because one is a remez for Mishnah and one is a remez for Gemara. Mishnah is planting the field. Gemara is pruning the vineyard. Why? What is pruning? Pruning also allows for growth. But how? By removing all of the obstacles. What the Gemara does is the Gemara will take a Mishnah and the Gemara will say, why does the Mishnah say this? The Mishnah should have written like this. Oh, because you might think that this is the halacha. So the Mishnah is written like this. Well, 1 second. But it doesn't make sense because it's contradicted by another Mishnah. The Gemara is basically pruning and removing all of the obstacles and all of the questions and all of the, so to speak, intellectual weeds that don't allow the fruit to blossom. And that's what real Gemara is. Real Gemara is, and those who learn well understand this so well, that basically you take the text and now you dissect it, you take it apart to the point that all of the clarification should become that the idea should become crystal clear, but first you have to work through all the weeds. So that's why the Gemara is full of thoughts and rejections. Salkadaitach, this is how we would think about it, but now we can't think about it. And then people who ask questions based on our original idea, and then you say, no, you misunderstood it. There's an argument. What's your perspective? What's your perspective? What do you come out with? You come out with a halacha brura, a clear conclusion, or at least a clear understanding of the debate. He says that's why the words of Talmud are compared to wine, which comes from a vineyard, because yayin ha-mesameach, once you get the clarity, it's like joyous wine. Mashenkin Mishnah nikri b'shem lechem. Mishnah is called bread. Uksiv lechem levav enosh yisad. It says by lechem in Barchi Nafshi in Tehillim 104. Lechem, it says bread will sustain the heart of people. It's like the staple food. Yayin brings joy. What's the difference? Mishnah is the substance of the Talmud. Every word of Gemara is based on Mishnah. So Mishnah is like the bread. But the simcha, the clarity, the real understanding of it, the full depth and enjoyment of it, that's the wine, and that's the vineyard, and that's the Gemara. And that's why here it's about planting, and here it's about pruning, because the whole Gemara is about pruning the vineyard. It says about wine, as we learned in Tehillim, wine brings joy to the heart of a person. It also says by wine in Sefer Shoftim and Judges, wine brings joy to God and brings joy to people. The Zohar says, there's wine that brings joy to the heart of man. There's heart that brings joy to God and to people. What's pshat? So the Rebbe says like this. That's an unbelievable word. In other words, we have a contradiction. What does wine do? In Tehillim it says, Yayin yisamach lavav enosh. It's good for weak people. Enosh is like a weak person. The word enosh, like machala anusha, it's like a person who's in a weaker state. So wine rejuvenates him. Take a cup of wine. But then the Tanakh says in Shoftim, Yayin mesamech elikim v'anoshim. Even Hashem likes a l'chaim. What's going on? So there's is yayin v'is yayin. There's wine and there's wine. What's pshat? So the Alter Rebbe says as Kikashamei v'nat Talmud. Unbelievable. Kashamei v'nat Talmud k'maysho lavish b'levushim gashmim. If you only learn the Gemara and you only understand the Gemara the way it's dressed up in physical garments, and his pasha doesn't have the ability to divest it from the levushim, liyas toiras elikav bekir bayaskolas elikus mamish, to be able to see that it's the Torah of his God, toiras elikav. Bekir by in him, in his kishkis, in his intestines. Haskalas alakus mamish. It's divine. It's a divine flow of consciousness. It's divine intellect, divine wisdom. It's infinity. Nikri yayin amisameich lavav enosh. It's still geschmack. A geschmack is stickle gemara. A geschmack is suge. You have the good word. It's a good svara. It thrills your mind. It's stimulating. People could learn Gemara. There were people who could learn Gemara whole life, and it's very geschmack. It's intellectual, and it's a puzzle, and you figure it out. You know how Gemara is, especially if you master the art of Gemara, how it works with the psukim, and the structures, and the ideas, and the svaras, and the chiris, and the dissections. Mechaya. A person needs joy in life. He gets simcha from the yayin. But then there is learning where the levushim, hagashmim, the physical garments of the Gemara are garments that are all there. You understand all the intellectual brilliance, but it's a channel, it's a levush that channels and manifests and contains within it mis'aneg al Hashem. It contains the divine tainug of Torah. How? Because he understands the ruchnius of Torah. That's the key. Or in the words of the Maimer earlier, he plants the seed in the earth And the earth, the seed is decomposed in the earth. In other words, you align. Everything is in the seed, but in the seed it's concealed. The whole seed has the DNA of Elikus. Because Torah is Chachmas Hashem, Huva Chachmas Yechad. But you could look at it as just technical stuff or interesting intellectual stuff. When I plant the seed in the earth, I connect it with the source. Antu Chakim V'la B'Chachmi Yediyah. This is Haskalos Beruchnius of Torah. This is the person understanding in the Ruchnius of Torah. And as I said earlier, this is one of the major ideas and contributions of Pnimiyus HaTorah. Torah's HaKabbalah, especially Torah's the teachings of Chassidus, especially in the school of the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya and his successors, that in every single halacha, in our Rambam and in our Rashi, in our Shtikl Gemara, in Zroyim, Moyed, Noshim, Nezikin, Kachim, Taras, every single halacha, every single idea in halacha, every single svara, every question, every tiyufta, every brisa, every mishnah, every raya, every teretz, everything. You have to understand very, very well, and also be able to see it as a lavush that is literally a container of divine infinity. It's be'etzem a Gan Eden Torah, and that's the haskal in Ruchnius HaTorah, seeing the full scope of the divinity, of the spirituality that's expressed here. Then it's a yayin ha'mesameach elikim. Then it's a different wine. Then it's a wine that doesn't only rejoice the human being in me, it also rejoices the divine inside of me. And that's why you see sometimes a person will say, I'm learning Gemara, I'm learning all these stuff, but I'm not inspired. Of course, because your intellect is being stimulated, which is amazing, which is a beautiful thing. And it's a big mitzvah and it's gewaldig. But your soul, your divinity is not being stimulated. The wine is bringing joy to the person, but not to God inside of you. You have a God inside of you. You see, he says, if you could be at mafshit from the levushim, lias toides eleikov bekir by askalas elukus mamash. If you can go out of the levushim, if you have that ability, you're taught how to be able to learn Torah and know that every svara in Gemara is chachmasoi uritzayna shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Hashem's will and wisdom. And it's not just a knowledge, it is, I believe it, but it's actually seeing it in the Torah. It's seeing it, it's learning it, it's a whole methodology, it's a whole approach. So that the Torah's Elikov is in him and it's Haskalas Elikus Mamash. Then it's a different wine. Then it's a wine that's Mesameach de Elikim. The Elikim inside of me, Besimchas Elikim v'chedvus Hashem. And that's the two wines. Isyayin v'isyayin, depends how you learn a shtikl Gemara. Haskalas Elikus means a perception, a perceptive, from the word seichel, a skill, to appreciate, to conceive, to understand. So here, for example, we learned about planting and pruning. We learned a whole thing in this Maimer about planting. If you learn Mishnayos, there's a lot of Mishnahs about planting. A lot in Seder Zroyim. If you learn Masechta Shabbos, you learn about pruning. We just learned about it. The Alter Rebbe is learning about all these things and explaining it from a spiritual perspective. This itself is a demonstration of this very theme, how he handles these themes, which are nigladika halachic themes, but shows the spiritual relevance. V'hine ksiv, he finishes. The pasuk says, Ki kerem Hashem tzvah is Beis Yisrael. The Navi says, the house of Yisrael is God's vineyard. V'tzarech kol echad ve'echad lavoid benafshe avodas hakerem. What does this mean, that I am Hashem's vineyard, you are Hashem's vineyard? He says every single person needs to work in his or her own soul the work of the vineyard. Liktzos hakoitzim, to cut the thorns. Dahainu hamidois nafshiyos sheba'adam haboyos minafshe hachiyunes dahainu kina v'sina v'taiva v'doimehen b'chdei levared hatoif. I have to go into my midas. A person has midas nafshis. Midas nafshis means my soulful responses and characteristics. And when they come from my natural biological soul, my natural animal soul, I'm often dominated by jealousy. I'm often dominated by hatred. I'm often dominated by all types of addictions. I crave things that may not be very good for me. These are the classic examples, v'daimein or anything similar. To be able to be mavarid the toiv, to be able to find the goodness inside and extract the good so that you could discard all of these emotions. Because all these emotions are doing something for a person. I'm jealous because somehow I need this jealousy for my survival. I hate you because somehow this hate is helping me. I'm binging, or I'm loving this because somehow it's helping me. My biological soul is feeling threatened. And if I'm jealous of you, somehow I'll feel safer. If I hate you, I'll feel safer. So he says, this is the avoid of the vineyard. Hashem says, you're my vineyard. In a vineyard, there's planting, but there's pruning. There's a lot of thorns there. Go, get rid of the thorns. You have a beautiful, beautiful vineyard. You're an amazing person. But get rid of the kaitzim so that the toiv, that the fruit can grow. So it's not just in learning Gemara, it's in applying it to life. I could learn the Gemara that's also pruning. But he says there's avodas hakarim in every person's neshama. For us, acher habirur. And then when I work through my vineyard, the pasuk finishes, Shabbos, Shabbosa, and Yiyah la'aretz Shabbos Lashem. Then there's the Shabbos that comes after the learning, after the avodah. There's the Shabbos before, which is tefillah. And then there's the Shabbos after the Torah and the Talmud b'yadei the avodah, where it becomes part of my life. Shem Gimel Minei Shabbosis. It says here 3 times Shabbos. Shabbos, Shabbosain, Yiyah la'aretz Shabbos. Because when you work through this vineyard, people operate on 3 levels of consciousness which parallel the 3 worlds. Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, where you have the thorns, because Atzilus is the world of oneness. There's no thorns over there. But Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, that's where there could be thorns. So when I work through the toiv in each one of them, so you have the Shabbos of Asiya, you have the Shabbos of Yitzira, and you have the Shabbos of Bria. That's the Shabbos, Shabbos, and Yiyah Shabbos Lashem. And he concludes V'dai L'mevin, and this will be enough for a person who understands. Wishing everybody an amazing Yom Tif. Kabbalas HaTorah b'simcha, Kabbalas HaTorah b'pnimiyus, for you, for your families, communities, for all of Klal Yisrael, especially for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. And we should be makabel this shvuas, the Torah, on all levels. The Torah hanigla, the Torah hanister, the Torah inside of me, the Torah of yayin mesameach levav enerj, the Torah of yayin mesameach lekim va'anoshim, and the Torah that comes with tefillah, and the Torah that brings to the birur of the vineyard. And as it says in Yeshaya, Torah Chadashim Iti Teitze, Mashiach comes, Hashem will reveal a new Torah, meaning the ultimate depth of Torah. We should experience that Torah. B'mheira b'yameinu, amen. A good Yom Tov, everybody.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Y. I really, really appreciate it. I got myself a bit confused. There's so many concepts. If you could just, the middle of the Maimer, the section, was it Gimel or Base, about Gimel, about the process of Torah, of planting, grinding. I get it on a sort of structural level, but if you could just help me on a panemius level, just to understand what the process really is, what we're supposed to be thinking as we go through Torah, the 4 stages.
Right. So I think one takeaway, one major takeaway is, and this is it's a subtle thing, it's a sensitive thing, but the truth is when you learn Chassidus for a while, especially the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, Chassidus B'chlal, but especially the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya's Chassidus, you become sensitive to this. And that is, you could almost experience it in a very visceral way, at least I could. Somebody is teaching Gemara. If it's yayin yisamach levav enosh, or it's yayin amasameach lekim va'anoshim. If the Torah is, if it's just a Torah of levushim gashman, which is brilliant, which is stimulating, which is powerful, which is a good thing to do. It's a holy pursuit. It's a mitzvah. It's a gewaldige thing. But it's missing the infinity. It's also missing the holistic quality, because when you align Torah with infinity, it encompasses the whole world. So it encompasses psychology and science and physics and astrophysics and cosmology and mathematics and biology, because it's the source of everything. So it's also a unified Torah. It's integrated. It's also a Torah that's very emotionally relevant. It's not just IQ, it's also EQ Torah. And the bigger things is that you don't feel an arrogance in the Torah. You don't feel a coarseness, a bruteness. Sometimes you feel in learning this a little bit of a haughtiness or almost like a competitiveness, like a mind game, mental gymnastics. There's a certain immaturity there, a certain primitiveness. You feel
so you're saying
bittle.
the four stages of planting, grinding, kneading, and baking essentially prepare the Torah to make it to what the Maimon says at the very end, so that it becomes yayin samech kim rather than just anoshim.
So these stages is basically, it works through the Torah. Now the Torah itself is a seed. The seed has everything. Mm-hmm. And the source of the Torah is Ein Sof. So it doesn't need our work. It's God's Torah. But to be able to see it in the seed, to be able to experience it in the seed, to be able to extract the potentiality from the seed, I can't leave it on the windowsill. Mm-hmm. I put it in the earth. I cover it in the earth. It decomposes in the earth. Now it produces a seed. It produces a stalk. Beautiful. Now I grind it. Then I knead it. Then I bake it. That's in the process of grain. In the process of the vineyard, it's obviously planting and pruning, and then, of course, squeezing the grapes and drinking the wine. So it's two different models. But the idea is turning it into something that becomes a link to infinity. It becomes an expression of infinity. And that's really the Torah of Gan Eden. The Torah of Gan Eden is the Torah where there's a fruit. In other words, the fruit captures the luster, the deliciousness, the delight of the Kayach HaTzemech in a very visual and experiential way. Schar mitzvah mitzvah. Right? Oir zarua latzadik u'leyishlev simcha. You have to plant the oir. Oir zarua. You got to plant it. And when you plant it, schar mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. It's the seed itself. You're not getting anything else. Fruit is not going to give you anything that's not in the seed. It's schar mitzvah, the mitzvah. It's just giving it itself. So there's various stages. The planting is obviously the basis, the foundation. Without planting, you're not going anywhere. But the grinding is the humility. If somebody's an arrogant person, this is never going to happen. To be a keli for chassidus, for pnimius, you need complete humility. The truth is, all learning needs humility, because learning by
some people, Rabbi that they dafka don't have at least conspicuous arrogance. If anything, it's the opposite. There's people that are more prone to neurosis and anxiety and negative emotions, and they feel quite broken. There's people who feel quite broken, which in a way possibly is a type of arrogance. I don't know how you look at it, but it's a painful. How can one use Chassid? What does a person do when they're trying their best to connect to Chassidus, but come what may, they feel broken? And I'm not talking about somebody who's clinically depressed or dysfunctional. They get up in the morning, but existence is difficult, and they're finding themselves inspired by Chassidus, but Lemaisa, they're not finding a way to translate it into their normal everyday living. Where are they going wrong? What advice do you have for such people?
Yeah, it's an important question, where the I wouldn't call it arrogance. This is a person who's broken, a person who's broken by a lot of anxiety or a lot of stress or a lot of neurosis, and even if they wake up in the morning, there's just something that sits deep inside of them. So I think there's two things that have to happen. The first thing is, one is just a very practical thing, and then the second thing is about learning Chassidus. The practical component is, these things don't always just turn up in a vacuum. There's very often a powerful foundation for them. And sometimes awareness of that helps, meaning to really appreciate what is happening inside of me. Not sometimes people dedicate their whole life to figure out why they're feeling a certain way, and they get stuck in that. But I mean awareness that's limud hamevi l'demaisa, to appreciate the dynamics in my brain, just to understand enough of why I'm responding the way I'm responding, so I could be comforted and almost see it as a predictable trajectory, which now I have a choice to change. In other words, neurosis is not so neurotic, or anxiety doesn't cause so much anxiety when I can identify exactly what is happening and why it's happening. I'll give you an example. If I'm trying to drive, let's say, from here, from Muncie, New York, I want to go to Manhattan. Okay. Manhattan is a 45-minute drive from here. Okay. But if I put on the Waze, and the Waze says the GW, George Washington Bridge, was a major event there, and it's closed down, and therefore it's going to get you from here to Manhattan, it's going to take you 3 hours, right? It'll take you 3 hours. So now it's very different. If I get into the car now, I know I have to plan a 3-hour trip. If I'm planning a 45-minute trip to go to an appointment, and then suddenly it's 3 hours, I'm frantic, I'm anxious, I'm neurotic, the world is falling apart. You know, Jews in traffic, right? They're suing the George Washington Bridge. They're suing the city. They're inventing a helicopter to be able to go over the traffic, whatever it is. They're dreaming of a motorcycle. But if I get into the car and it says it's going to be a 3-hour trip, right? Or they tell me the plane is delayed for 6 hours. So if you're going to the airport now, you're going to have to sit 6 hours, right? Or I'm going on a hike and they tell me this hike is not going to be an hour. This hike is going to be a 7-hour hike. So even though it's going to be hard, it's very different. The same is true in our brains. If I can understand, that I'm going to come to a Shabbos table, or I'm going to come to a Shavuos meal, or I'm going to sit with my wife and children, and basically there's going to be chaos in my brain. So then the chaos is already much different. It's like, Bruchim Abayim, welcome, this is part of it. And now the question is what to do. Do I take it seriously? How seriously do I have to take it?
So it's a bit similar to the strategy that Tanya talks about when we have negative thoughts in tefillah and we take them and we get too upset because really we're assuming we're on the level of a tzaddik when really we should accept.
I think I'm a tzaddik and I'm getting upset that I have all these machshavas zaros. He says, what are you getting upset for?
So philosophically speaking, these problems are really becoming exacerbated and amplified because I'm not in touch with the truth, the MS of who I am and where I'm at this moment. And so Chassidus, you're saying, properly learned is not just about inspiring a nice intellectual experiment or getting inspired with Rabbi YY's shir, but actually to be able to use these models to be able to train yourself to become to really face up to who you are.
Exactly. A major part of anxiety is not what's causing the anxiety. A major part of anxiety is amplified by the fact that I'm having anxiety from that which causes anxiety.
Yeah. Similar to what you would 100%.
Not supposed to be trapped. Huh? What?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rabbi YY.
And if you realize what you realize, the question you asked is not only relevant to the Maimer, but the Alter Rebbe, middle of the Maimer, takes an unexpected turn. That from the trajectory of how this Maimer is developing, I think it's very strange. It's a Maimer that's all about dvekus, deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, until li'ishtava begufa de malka. There's no separation. Vayasi, you are God's food. In other words, you're inside of him, you're one. Like my food is one with me. There's no two people. There's me and my food. There's no Hashem and you, it's one. That's the trajectory of the Maimer. Suddenly, when he comes to the pinnacle, where the bread is being baked, what happens? He explains that it's Ava Ka'esh, and Ava Ka'esh doesn't leave you intact anymore. Ava Kamayim works with you. Ava Ka'esh is all-encompassing. You're completely, so to speak, subsumed in the flame. Flame doesn't leave anything untouched, unscathed. The fire burns up everything. Nothing is there anymore. Nothing exists. Everything is crumbled. In other words, the whole nefesh is now consumed. Wow. Then he says there's something else in the baking. What's else? A Maisa with Yosef crying for Binyamin, every person feels the grief and the pain of the Nitzutz Alakuz, Binyamin ben Aini, that went down and faces so many difficult stuff. And he says, and you cry for it. But don't let those tears take over your life. Hachadra. One part of you feels the pain, and then you come out and you say, Fevra, let's eat bread. It's time to learn. Where does this come into the Maimer? This is exactly his point. Person could learn and learn and learn and be inspired, and then suddenly they're dealing with all types of neurosis, with all types of stress, with all types of anxiety, with all types of depression, with a mental illness or mental challenges or personality disorders or mood disorders or difficult circumstances and difficult sensations and emotions inside of us. So this is the power of this Maimer. He says, okay, and that's why I'm telling you that part of baking the bread is feeling the warm compassion, feeling compassion for those parts of you. In other words, knowing I'm trying to get on the George Washington Bridge. I'm trying to take, well, I know you don't have a George Washington Bridge by you, but I'm trying to get on the bridge of Likutei Torah to take me as a ladder to heaven. And suddenly, there's 3 hours of traffic. It's supposed to be 45 minutes. What's going on? So he says, yeah, look. And say, yeah, I'm stuck. I'm stuck in traffic. It's called Ben Oini. It's called Binyamin, Ben Oini. And there's space for that. You should still go eat bread. There's joy in my heart from this side. There's tears in my heart from this side. And they're not a contradiction. They work together. That's the story of life. Why does he put that into the Maimer, right and smack in the middle? Exactly for this reason.
Yeah.
And the awareness of that makes it much easier to handle. Your typhus?
Thank you so much, Rabbi YY. I'm getting a bad reception and I'm going to have to go now as well. But thank you so much. I wish you a good Yom Tov.
Yom Tov. And everything.
And thank you very much for this explanation. It's been very, very helpful. Thank you.
Give over the teachings to your Chevra over there.
Thank you. I'm learning the Maimer actually with my son and my 16, 17-year-old. So I'm sure I can't be Masbir as good as you, but I'm trying. Thank you so much. Good Yom Tov. Good Yom Tov. Amen. Amen.
See ya.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.